The first time I met his mother, she looked me up and down like I was an inconvenience. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she said, "So, you're the one keeping my son busy lately." I laughed politely, thinking it was just her way of teasing. I was wrong. From that day, I felt her studying me, my clothes, my words, my every move. When I brought her flowers, she said she was allergic. When I offered to help cook, she said her kitchen wasn't for strangers. Still, I tried. For Daniel. He adored his mother, saw her as the most selfless woman alive. And I wanted to believe that if I was kind enough, patient enough, she'd accept me too. But behind her sweet tone, there was always a warning. Don't forget who raised him. I didn't. I just didn't know she'd make sure I never could. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner, the way she smiled when we argued, the way she whispered things that made him doubt me. But love makes you blind. And she counted on that. At first, her jabs were subtle. She'd accidentally mention his ex, how she used to cook better, dress better, fit in better. Daniel would laugh it off, kiss my forehead, and tell me not to take it personally. But it wasn't personal to him. It was to me. Every dinner turned into an unspoken test. If I didn't compliment her cooking enough, she'd pout. If I did, she'd smirk and say, "You could learn a few things, dear." I swallowed the words I wanted to say. Daniel would squeeze my hand under the table, silently asking me to keep the peace. So I did. When we got home, he'd say, "She's just protective. You know how moms are." And I'd nod, pretending I didn't feel myself shrinking every time she reminded me that I'd never be enough for her son. The night she called me a phase, I laughed it off. But that laughter stuck in my throat later when I heard her tell Daniel, "You'll wake up one day and realize she's holding you back." And he didn't defend me. Not that night. Not for a long time. The first real crack came during our engagement party. His mother organized it, her idea, her guest list, her house. I offered to help, but she waved me off. "Just show up, dear. I'll handle it." When we arrived, everything looked perfect, except for one thing. She hadn't included my family. I pulled Daniel aside. "Where are my parents?" He looked confused. "Mom said she invited them." She hadn't. And when I asked her later, she smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten. So many names to remember." Forgotten? My own parents? Daniel frowned, but he didn't say much. He just muttered, "She didn't mean it like that." I stared at him, wondering how many times he'd say that before realizing, she always meant it. That night, when he danced with his mother and she whispered something in his ear, he laughed. And for a moment, I stood there in the middle of our own celebration feeling like the guest at someone else's party. That was the first night I wondered what kind of life I was walking into. And what kind of woman I'd have to become to survive it. Marriage didn't make things better. It just gave her more ways to interfere. She had a key to our apartment, a gift Daniel insisted on because it'll make her feel included. So she came and went as she pleased. I'd come home from work to find her rearranging our kitchen, moving my clothes, or folding laundry that didn't need folding. Once, I walked in to see her wearing my apron, cooking dinner like she owned the place. When I asked why, she said, "You're busy." "I'm helping." But it wasn't help. It was control. She was marking her territory, reminding me that in her eyes, this was still her son's home, not mine. Daniel didn't see it. He saw devotion. I saw domination. And every time I tried to talk to him, he'd say, "Please don't make me choose between you two." The sad part was, I never asked him to. He just kept choosing, without realizing he already was. By our first anniversary, the tension had become a third presence in our home, silent, heavy, uninvited. His mother had opinions on everything, what I wore, how I spoke, how we spent money. She'd drop comments like poison in tea. Sweet at first, deadly later. One evening, Daniel came home looking worried. "Mom's upset," he said. "She feels like you don't respect her." I froze. Respect her? I repeated. For what? Controlling every part of our lives. He sighed. "She just wants to be part of our family." "She wants to be our family," I said quietly. He rubbed his temples. "Can you please just try to get along?" For me? That's when I realized his peace came at the cost of my silence. I looked at him, the man I loved, the boy she still owned, and something inside me cracked just enough to let the truth in. If I wanted to survive this marriage, I couldn't fight her on her terms. I had to wait. And when the time came, she'd never see it coming. The day we told her we were thinking of buying a house, her smile froze halfway through. "Oh," she said. "Moving out already? That's fast." Daniel laughed, missing the sting behind her words. But I didn't. When she found out the house wasn't near her neighborhood, her tone turned icy. "So far away," she said, swirling her tea. "Who will look after Daniel when he needs help?" "I'll be there," I said, trying to sound calm. She looked straight at me. "That's what you think." That night, Daniel got a call, his mother crying. I could hear her voice through the speaker. "She's taking you away from me, Daniel. Don't let her ruin what we have." He hung up, looking torn. "She's just emotional," he said softly. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled and kissed his cheek. "It's okay," I said. "I'll handle it." But as I lay awake that night, I knew handling it wasn't enough anymore. His mother wasn't just meddling, she was pulling strings, and I was becoming the puppet that smiled while she cut my lines. Her next move was subtle. She began calling him every morning, just to check in. If he didn't answer, she'd send a dozen texts. If he did, she'd talk for an hour about how lonely she was. At first, he brushed it off. Then he started visiting her more. "Just dinner," he'd say. Some nights, he didn't come home until midnight. When I asked why, he said, "She's been feeling down." "You wouldn't understand." Wouldn't understand? I understood perfectly. She was tightening her grip again, pulling him back into her orbit. One evening, I came home to find her in our kitchen, again. She smiled, stirring soup like she belonged there. "Daniel told me you're busy these days," she said. "Don't worry, I'll take care of him." My throat tightened. "This isn't your home," I said quietly. She laughed. "Oh, dear. It's always been my son's home." And then she turned back to the stove, humming. That hum stayed in my ears long after she left, like a warning I couldn't unhear. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. Daniel had planned a weekend trip for us, something we hadn't done in months. We packed, smiled, and for once, I felt hopeful. Then, just as we were leaving, his phone rang. Her. I watched his face change as she spoke. When he hung up, he sighed. "She's not feeling well," he said. "We can't just leave her." I stared at him. "Daniel, she's fine. She always says that when." "She's my mother," he snapped. Silence filled the room. Then he muttered, "I'll go check on her. We'll go next weekend." Next weekend never came. He left that night, and I sat there staring at our packed bags until the clock struck midnight. It wasn't about the trip anymore. It was about how easily she could twist him, guilt him, control him, while I was left waiting for scraps of his attention. And that's when I stopped hoping she'd accept me. I realized I didn't need her approval. I needed a plan. From then on, I watched her like she watched me. Every call. Every word. Every manipulation. I learned her rhythm, how she played the victim, how she cried on cue, how she turned Daniel's kindness into a weapon. She wanted me emotional. So I became quiet. She wanted me angry. So I smiled. At first, it threw her off. When she made her usual jabs, I didn't bite. When she showed up unannounced, I offered tea in silence. Daniel started noticing. "She's trying, you know," he'd say. "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe she's just seeing how far she can go." The tension grew, unspoken but thick enough to choke on. Then one day, I found her sitting in our living room, flipping through our bills. "What are you doing?" I asked. She didn't even look up. "Protecting my son's money." I realized then, she wasn't trying to ruin my marriage. She was trying to own it. And she didn't know yet, but I was done playing defense. The next phase of her plan was brilliant and cruel. She started planting doubts in Daniel's mind, little seeds of mistrust. "I saw her at the mall today," she'd say over dinner. "With someone. Looked close." Or, "You work so hard, Daniel. I hope she appreciates it." Each comment hit like a whisper of poison. And slowly, I saw it working. Daniel began to look at me differently, cautious, uncertain, like he was waiting for proof of something that didn't exist. One night, he asked quietly, "You've been distant lately. Is there someone else?" I stared at him, too stunned to speak. Then I realized she'd finally done it. She'd made him doubt the one person still on his side. I wanted to scream, to tell him everything. But instead, I said, "If you really think that, maybe you should ask the person who put the idea in your head." He looked guilty but didn't answer. That silence was all the proof I needed. And in that moment, something inside me changed. I wasn't going to fight her anymore. I was going to end this, quietly, completely, on my terms. I didn't argue with him that night. Instead, I sat beside him on the couch, calm and unreadable. "Daniel," I said softly, "if you ever believe I'd betray you, then maybe you don't know me at all." He didn't answer. His silence was a wall I couldn't climb. So I stopped trying. Over the next few weeks, I became the version of myself his mother didn't expect. I didn't complain. I didn't chase. I smiled, cooked dinner, asked about his day, and while he tried to decode my piece, I was building my own plan quietly behind it. I gathered small truths, the calls she made late at night, the words she said that contradicted themselves, the way she lied so easily when Daniel wasn't around. I wasn't going to expose her yet. Not until she'd dug her own grave deep enough to climb into it. Because the one thing she underestimated about me was patience. And patience, when sharpened by pain, becomes precision. Her next move came quicker than I expected. She accidentally called me one afternoon, thinking she was speaking to Daniel. I answered quietly. "You need to open your eyes," she hissed. "That woman is using you." I froze. Then I realized she hadn't noticed my voice. She kept talking. "She's pretending to love you for what you can give her. You'll see. One day she'll leave like all the rest." I recorded every word. When she hung up, my hands trembled, not from fear, but relief. Finally, I had proof. That night, when Daniel came home, I said nothing. He told me his mother had been worried about me again. I smiled and nodded, biting back the truth. I wasn't ready to show him yet. I needed him to see her true nature with his own eyes, no recordings, no explanations. Because when he finally saw it, I wanted there to be no doubt left at all. Her downfall began with her favorite game, guilt. She called Daniel crying, saying she'd fallen and needed him to come immediately. He rushed out the door before I could say anything. An hour later, he came home pale. "She was fine," he said. "She said she just wanted to see me." I nodded. That's how she keeps you close. He frowned. She's just lonely. But I saw something flicker in his eyes, the first spark of doubt. It was small, but it was there. The next day, she showed up at our place again. While Daniel was showering, she leaned close and whispered, "When he realizes what you've done to him, you'll regret ever meeting me." I smiled faintly. Maybe. But by then, you'll regret meeting me first. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just stared, studying me, as if realizing I wasn't the same girl she'd once toyed with. When she finally left, I locked the door behind her and didn't hand Daniel the spare key again. The tension in the house grew like smoke before a fire. Daniel felt it, though he didn't understand it yet. He noticed I didn't flinch when his mother's name came up. I didn't beg for peace anymore, I simply let silence answer for me. One evening, he came home looking shaken. "She told me you've been going through my phone," he said. I set down my cup calmly. "Have I?" He hesitated, realizing he had no proof, only her words. Then something in his face shifted. "She's been lying a lot lately," he murmured. That was the beginning of the end. That night, he didn't call her before bed. And the next morning, she called him 5 times before giving up. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't rush to fix her mood. He just looked at me across the breakfast table and said quietly, "I think I need to see things for myself." I nodded. "You will." And I meant it. The moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Sunday dinner, her idea, as always. She insisted we come over, claiming she wanted to make peace. I almost said no, but then I realized this was it. When we arrived, she hugged Daniel tightly, ignoring me completely. Dinner started politely enough, but as soon as we sat, the barbs began. Little jabs. Subtle insults. Then, when Daniel went to the kitchen, she leaned in and said softly, "He'll leave you eventually. You're not his equal, no matter what you think." What she didn't know was that Daniel had come back quietly and heard everything. He froze in the doorway. Her face turned white when she saw him. "Mom," he whispered, "how could you?" I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. For the first time, the lies crumbled on their own. And as he walked out without saying another word, I knew her ruin had finally begun. Daniel didn't say a word during the drive home. The silence between us was thick, not angry, but heavy with realization. When we got inside, he sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, eyes blank. "She's been doing this for a long time, hasn't she?" he asked quietly. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just said, "You needed to see it for yourself." He nodded slowly, face pale. "She made me believe you were the problem." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "She made you believe she was the only one who loved you." That night, he didn't call her. For the first time, the phone stayed silent. I knew it wouldn't last, control like hers doesn't disappear overnight, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, I slept beside a man who finally understood the cost of his silence. When morning came, the air felt different. Lighter. Quieter. Almost like peace was testing the door, wondering if it was finally safe to come in. It didn't take long for her to fight back. The next day, she showed up at his office, crying, claiming I was turning her son against her. He didn't tell me right away, but I found out from one of his coworkers. When he came home, I waited. "Finally," he said, "she's upset." "I'm sure she is," I replied. "Losing control always hurts." He sighed. "I just don't know what to do." "You don't have to do anything," I said softly. "Just stop protecting her lies." He stared at me for a long moment before nodding. 2 days later, he changed his number. She called mine instead, 23 times in one day. I didn't answer. When she showed up at our door that weekend, I didn't open it. Instead, I watched from the window as Daniel stood outside, telling her to leave. Her voice cracked, shouting, pleading, accusing, all the tricks she'd used for years. But he didn't cave this time. He just closed the door. And when he came back in, his hands were shaking, but free. The house felt different after that day. Quieter, lighter, almost like it exhaled with me. Daniel tried to rebuild what we'd lost. He apologized, not once, but in 100 small ways. Cooking dinner. Listening more. Asking, "How was your day?" and meaning it. But rebuilding trust isn't about words or gestures. It's about consistency. And while I loved him, I couldn't pretend the wounds weren't still healing. Sometimes, I'd wake up at night and remember the way his mother smiled while I shrank into silence. Other times, I'd catch him looking at his phone, and the old ache would flicker before I pushed it away. Still, we tried. And slowly, we began to find rhythm again, one built not on control, but on choice. He started therapy on his own. He came home one evening and said quietly, "I need to unlearn everything she made me believe." That was the moment I finally believed change was possible. Because he wasn't fixing things for me anymore, he was fixing them for himself. A month later, she called again. This time, Daniel answered, on speaker. Her voice was trembling. "I can't believe you'd turn your back on your own mother." He said calmly, "Mom, I didn't turn my back. You pushed me away." She gasped like he'd slapped her. "I did everything for you." "I know," he said. "And that's the problem. You never let me do anything for myself." The line went silent. Then she whispered, "She's poisoned you." I stepped closer and said gently, "No, Mrs. Hart. You poisoned everything you touched." I just stopped drinking it. There was a sharp inhale, a click, and then silence. She never called again. Daniel sat back, eyes wet but steady. "I think that's the first time I've ever told her no," he said. I took his hand. "And the world didn't end, did it?" He laughed softly. "No. It actually feels like it's just beginning." In the weeks that followed, peace became a habit. Our home no longer smelled of tension. Laughter returned, cautious but real. Daniel kept his distance from his mother, though she sent the occasional message, each one less venomous, more desperate. I didn't hate her. I pitied her. Because in the end, her ruin wasn't loud. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was quiet, like the sound of relevance fading from someone's life. One afternoon, I stood by the window, watching sunlight pour across the floor, and realized something. I didn't win by destroying her. I won by refusing to become her. Daniel came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled. "More than okay." For years, she tried to make me small. But the truth was, I never needed to fight for space. I just needed to stop giving mine away. And that, I realized, was what real ruin looked like. Not losing power, but watching someone else live free from it. A few months passed before we heard from her again. This time, it wasn't a call or a visit. It was a letter. Daniel found it in the mailbox, his name written in her neat, careful handwriting. He read it silently, then handed it to me. Inside, her words were full of guilt, the kind that comes only when control stops working. She wrote, "I just wanted to keep you close." I didn't know how to let go. There was no apology to me, but I didn't need one anymore. She wasn't the villain in my story anymore, she was just someone who never learned the difference between love and possession. Daniel folded the letter, sighed, and said quietly, "I think she's finally realizing what she lost." I nodded. Maybe. But sometimes realizing it doesn't change anything. He reached for my hand. "Thank you," he whispered. For not giving up on me. I smiled faintly. You're the one who found your way back. Outside, a soft rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing, the kind that washed away the echoes of old storms. As the months rolled on, life slowly settled into something steady, not perfect, but peaceful. Daniel and I started fresh in small ways, repainting the house, buying new curtains, cooking together again. There was laughter now, not forced, but natural. Sometimes we'd dance in the kitchen, clumsy and laughing, and I'd remember what it felt like to be loved without conditions. One evening, he looked at me and said, "You know, she used to tell me marriage would ruin my life." I smiled. Maybe she was half right. He frowned. Half right? She was right that it changed your life. But ruin doesn't always look like destruction, sometimes it's transformation. He thought about that for a while before nodding. Then I guess she was the one who got ruined, he said softly. I didn't respond. I just held him tighter, grateful that the ruins she left behind had become the foundation we were finally rebuilding from. Because sometimes, peace doesn't come from fixing what's broken, it comes from learning to live beautifully among the pieces. The next time I saw her was by accident. I was at the grocery store, reaching for a carton of milk, when I heard her voice behind me. Isabel? I froze. Slowly, I turned. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, quieter. The sharpness in her eyes had dulled. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she said, "You look well." "I am," I replied simply. She hesitated, glancing at the floor. I didn't mean for things to go the way they did. I believed her, at least, the part that came from regret, not remorse. "I know," I said softly. "You just didn't know when to stop." Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. Then she whispered, "Take care of him." I smiled gently. He's learning to take care of himself now. We stood there in silence, two women who had once fought for the same man in different ways, one out of love, the other out of fear. And then I walked away, lighter than I'd felt in years. Daniel and I moved to a new home later that year, farther away, closer to the sea. It wasn't an escape, it was a beginning. Some evenings, we'd walk by the shore, barefoot, letting the cold water wash over our feet. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. It had become a quiet lesson instead of an open wound. One night, he said, "I used to think strength meant keeping the peace no matter what. Now I know it means choosing it, even if it costs something." I smiled. Peace isn't free. But it's worth everything. He nodded, squeezing my hand. The waves rolled in, steady and sure, and I realized that was what healing felt like. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady. And though we didn't say it out loud, we both knew. The woman who once tried to ruin us had only taught us what it meant to rebuild right. A year later, I woke up to sunlight pouring through the window. Our home was quiet, full of warmth and laughter that no longer echoed anyone else's bitterness. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the tide drift in the distance. There were no ghosts left, just memories that didn't hurt anymore. I thought about her sometimes, not with anger, but with a kind of detached kindness. She had tried to break me, and instead, she'd built me. Because surviving her taught me who I was. Daniel came up behind me, kissed my shoulder, and whispered, "You okay?" I smiled. "More than okay." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You know, she once said you ruined my life." I looked out at the sunlit water and said quietly, "Maybe I did, but I ruined it just enough to rebuild it right." And as we stood there, the world calm around us, I realized ruin isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's the beginning of everything worth living for.